Klaus pointed his finger forward and laughed loudly. In front of him sat a bald cadet, whom he asked about where his hair had gone. Bruce shook with anger, thinking that he could not even yell at him because of his neighbor. The doctor closed the screen and apologized, saying that he laughed too hard and that he would cover for him, so the guy thought that it was too late. Klaus stopped in front of the protagonist. He was lying with his hands behind his head. The doctor raised one eyebrow, thinking that something must have happened during the night. He turned away and decided that he would not pay attention. After all, his teacher said that he should concentrate only on healing and not ask questions. The light was on in the windows of the 8th group dormitory 2 days later. Jack looked ahead angrily when he said that this was interesting and asked about the fact that he should not have been expelled from the group. He crossed his arms over his chest when the man in front of him said that he was going to cut the tendons of cadet number 7, but probably due to numerous injuries. The doctor stood over Ash all night without leaving for a minute. Jack opened his mouth and asked about whether he really considered the doctor's lack of sleep an excuse. Bruce looked away and answered that he went at night as he was ordered, but the doctor woke up. The veins on the prince's face appeared. He angrily hit the cadet and exclaimed that the doctor must have incredibly acute hearing. Bruce hit his head on the floor and screamed. The prince kicked him and cursed, then asked him why he couldn't handle even such a trifle. He turned to Simon, who asked him to wait a second, and asked why. The cadet sat down next to Bruce and asked if he happened to know the doctor's name. The guy looked up, hunted, and replied that he thought his name was Klaus. Jack looked at Simon and asked if he knew the name, when Simon said he had heard it before. The bald guy turned to the prince and said that he was probably a student of Dr. Gerald, then he was asked again. He pictured the old man with a needle in his hand and remembered that he was a member of the Poison Clan but chose to do healing rather than poisoning, and then became the Lord's personal doctor, and that he heard that Gerald was in the top 30, the Demon Academy, even though he was a doctor. Jack gritted his teeth when he was told that it wasn't certain, but if their doctor was his student, then his martial arts skills could be amazing. The prince punched the boy lying on the floor and exclaimed that sending that fool was a waste of effort. The cadet's nose started bleeding when Jack told him not to even dream of helping his clan, then Bruce wondered about what he said. He remembered the prince smiling at him and asking if he would do something for him. Then Jack opened his palm to him and told him not to worry about failing, because he was the heir of the Creek clan, so if Bruce was expelled for some reason, he would definitely help his small clan. He punched the boy, who thought that if Jack had kept his promise, he would have told him the truth. Bruce, crying, looked up from under his brows, mentally addressing the prince with the words that he could continue to beat him, but he would see how long he lasted when the boy returned. The prince's hand grabbed the bandana when he asked why he was wearing it. Jack ripped the hat off the boy. He saw his reflection in the bald spot. He continued to kick the boy when he said what people would do and asked about how he really thought the prince would forgive him if he came with repentance and a shaved head. Sweat appeared on the faces of the cadets when they thought about how they hoped that everything was relatively under control, but the wing was becoming noisy again. Jack and Simon walked away from the beaten boy when the prince told the escort that he felt lousy and offered to leave. The bald boy was shaking, cursing in his head and wishing for Jack to die. Meanwhile, Klaus looked ahead in surprise and replied that he only studied medicine when Ash asked if the doctor studied martial arts. The light was on in the hallway 7 days later in the Demon Academy's infirmary. He took a step forward. The protagonist put his hands in front of him. He turned around, raising dust. Ash put his hands behind his back. Hank looked ahead seriously when he realized that, as he thought, this guy was a genius. The protagonist stopped by the window when the teacher thought about the fact that he had only demonstrated the butterfly technique a couple of times and corrected his body position over these few days, but his movements were smooth and natural. Hank frowned deeply, thinking that if the guy constantly trained, he would have no problem practicing the elements. The teacher opened his mouth wide and exclaimed that there would be elements next. The guy clenched his fists. He remembered looking at the man's hands and thinking that with Nano scanning the teacher's posture, he could replicate it exactly. Sweat appeared on the boy's face as he realized that this would be suspicious, so he should do it a little slower. Ash quickly changed his posture. He bent down, touching the floor. Hank looked ahead carefully, thinking about the transitions in the Nigong technique consisted of 24 elements, and how the first 3 elements counted as 1 and created 8 elements. The protagonist looked away tensely as the teacher thought about how it took too long to teach him the basics, so he couldn't teach him the combinations. Hank looked ahead seriously as he realized that if he had a month or 2 with him, he would be able to learn everything completely, but there was not enough time. Ash stopped in front of the teacher, who said that that was all and that he remembered it well. The protagonist folded his hands in front of him and replied that the teacher flattered him. Between his fingers lay a folded piece of paper. Ash stopped in front of Hank as he explained that these were the first elements of the butterfly technique and the methods of controlling the Nigong, and that his teacher wanted to teach him this himself, but since today was the last day, he could easily master the basics with his intelligence and quick wits. The protagonist looked ahead in confusion as Hank added that he would check when they met later, so he should not be lazy and learn everything well. The teacher had his back to him and asked him not to let him down, when the student thanked him and said that he would not let him down. Hank pointed to the sword in its sheath. The blade itself was placed in his hand. The protagonist's face was reflected in the blade as the teacher said that this was his wild blade. He tossed the sword to the excited student and told him to try it with it. Ash looked at the blade in his hands and replied that it was not as heavy as it seemed when the teacher asked if it was light. Hank snatched the sword from the boy's hands and said that ordinary swords weighed 1.5 to 2 kilograms, but the priceless blades of their clan, the perfect battle swords, weighed only about a kilogram. Ash suggested that it was because of the butterfly technique, and the teacher replied that he was a genius. Hank waved the blade in front of the boy. The young man picked up a severed piece of bed and said that the sword was indeed very sharp, and he thought that if the doctor saw this, he would be angry. The teacher put the blade on his shoulder and said that although it was narrow and light, it was made of the finest metal, and its sharpness and durability earned this sword its name. Ash looked at the blade warily when the man told him to step back, because he would show him what the boy wanted to see. Hank got into a fighting stance and told him to watch carefully, because this was his teacher's butterfly technique. The protagonist looked forward carefully and turned to Nano. His eye lit up as he asked her to prepare for a scan, then Nano informed him that a scan had been initiated on the user's orders. So, friends, this chapter comes to an end. What will happen next? We'll uncover it in the next chapter. Don't forget to rate this chapter out of 10 in the comments. We'll see you in the next video. Until then, take care and goodbye. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.